The stack of overdue notices hit the hospital billing desk with a sound that felt louder than it was. Or maybe that was just the way things sounded when you were already bracing for the worst. Lena Farrow set them down one by one, organized by date, each one highlighted in yellow because she had learned a long time ago that when you came to places like this without money, you had better come with organization. It was the only armor she could afford. The billing clerk, a man in his 40s with reading glasses pushed too far down his nose, did not look up. "Name," he said. "Farrow. Lena Farrow. I'm here about my son's account. Room 314. He had emergency surgery 11 days ago." Lena pushed the folder across the counter. "I have the insurance explanation of benefits, the itemized bill, and I've highlighted the charges I'd like to dispute because there are 3 separate line items for anesthesia when he only went under once." The clerk looked at the folder. He looked at Lena. He looked at the badge on her chest that read housekeeping, Augustine Medical Center, and then he looked back at his screen. The account shows a balance of $42,600. Lena already knew the number. She had been living inside it for 11 days. "I'm aware of the balance," she said carefully. "What I'm asking about is the financial hardship application. I filled it out online, but I never received a confirmation, and when I called the number on the website, it rang for 40 minutes and then disconnected." The clerk typed something, stopped, typed something else. "Your application was denied." Lena blinked. "Denied? On what basis?" "Income exceeds threshold. I earn $29,000 a year cleaning rooms in this building," Lena said, keeping her voice exactly level, the way she had practiced in the car ride over. "My son spent 6 days in the ICU. The threshold is $45,000 for a household of 2, I checked. I am under it." "The system shows denied." The clerk shrugged, already looking past her at the man behind her in line. "You can appeal. The form is on the website. The website that disconnected my call for 40 minutes. I can't speak to that." "Can you speak to the 3 anesthesia charges?" He finally looked at her fully, the way people look when they have decided you are a problem. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside. There are other patients waiting." Lena did not step aside. She was 31 years old, and she had been stepping aside her entire life, and she was very, very tired of it. "I am a patient's family member," she said. "My son is 17 years old, and he almost died in this building 11 days ago, in a room that I personally cleaned before he was moved into it. I have documentation, I have a legitimate dispute, and I have the right to be assisted." The clerk looked at a security guard standing near the elevator bank. Lena saw it. She had seen that look before, in grocery stores, in government offices, in places where the people behind the counters had decided before you even opened your mouth that you were not the kind of person who warranted patience. "You're going to call security," she said, "because I asked about a billing error. Because you're holding up the line. I have been standing here for 4 minutes." "Ma'am, my name is Lena Farrow," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I mop the floors of this hospital 5 days a week. I have worked here for 7 years. I have cleaned the room of every important person who has ever walked through those doors, and not one of them had to justify their right to stand at this counter." She pulled her lanyard from under her coat and held it up. The badge caught the fluorescent light. "I belong here more than anyone in this building." The security guard was moving toward her now, and then the elevator opened. The sound of it was ordinary, just a soft chime, the kind that happened 100 times a day in that lobby. But the silence that followed was not ordinary at all. It was the kind of silence that a room produces when someone walks in who makes it feel smaller just by existing in it. James Calloway, the chief executive officer of St. Augustine Medical Center, walked out of that elevator in a charcoal suit that looked like it had been pressed by someone whose only job was pressing suits. He was in his early 40s, dark-haired, with the kind of posture that came not from arrogance, but from decades of having to stand in rooms where everything depended on him appearing steady. His eyes moved across the lobby the way a person's eyes move when they are used to reading rooms quickly and quietly. He stopped. He looked at the security guard. He looked at the billing clerk. He looked at Lena Farrow, who was holding her employee badge up in one hand and a highlighted folder in the other, her chin lifted, her jaw set, her eyes bright with a kind of anger she was clearly trying very hard to keep professional. "What is happening here?" James said. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The clerk straightened so fast he nearly knocked his keyboard off the counter. Mr. Calloway, sir, we were just, the patient's family member was. There was a situation with the line. James looked at the line. There were 2 people in it. He looked at the security guard, who had stopped moving. Go back to your post, James said. The guard went. James walked to the counter and stood beside Lena, close enough that she could see the precise crease in his lapel, and looked at the clerk. Start over. What does she need? The clerk swallowed. She has a billing dispute, sir. The financial hardship application was denied, and she's claiming there are 3 separate anesthesia charges, Lena said, because no one else was going to say it correctly. For a single procedure, my son's surgery on the 14th. Room 314. James looked at her then, really looked at her, the housekeeping badge, the organized folder, the yellow highlights visible on the pages sticking out of the top. May I? He gestured toward the folder. Lena handed it over, mostly because she was too surprised not to. James opened it. He read. Not the way people read when they're performing attention, but the way people read when they actually intend to understand something. These are legitimate flags, he said after a moment. He set the folder on the counter in front of the clerk. Pull the account. We're going to go through this line by line. The clerk opened his mouth. James looked at him. The clerk pulled up the account. Lena stood there, folder in hand, trying to understand what was happening, because in her experience, men in charcoal suits at hospital billing counters did not go through things line by line. They delegated, they moved on, they had other floors to be on. She reached into her bag to put her badge away, and the bag, which had been doing fine until this precise moment, decided it was done cooperating. The zipper caught on the lining, she tugged, and the whole thing tilted sideways and hit the edge of the counter and spilled. Keys. A travel pack of tissues, 3 pens, grocery receipt she'd been meaning to throw away, a small plastic dinosaur that belonged to no one she could currently explain, and an envelope, thin and old, the paper gone soft at the corners from years of being carried and not opened, which slid off the counter and landed face up on the floor at James Calloway's feet. I'm so sorry, Lena said, already crouching. I swear I am normally a functional person. This bag has been a liability since 2019. She grabbed the keys, the pens, the dinosaur, which she absolutely was not going to explain. James crouched down too. You don't have to, she started. I know, he said and reached for the envelope. And then he went still. Not the stillness of someone being polite. The stillness of someone who has just had the ground move under them. Lena looked up from the floor. James was holding the envelope, staring at the return address in the upper left corner, with an expression she had no context for. He had gone pale. Not a little pale. The kind of pale that happens before something changes. Mr. Calloway, she said carefully. He didn't answer right away. He turned the envelope over, looked at the front. The name printed there, Thomas Farrow, C.O. Lena. Who sent you this? James said, and his voice was different, lower. Stripped of the CEO register entirely. Lena sat back on her heels. My father. He sent it to me about 2 months before he died. I never opened it. I don't know why. She stopped. It felt like if I opened it, he'd be more gone, which doesn't make sense. James looked at her. What was your father's name? Thomas Farrow. He was an ER nurse here for almost 20 years before he got sick. He retired in 2017. She frowned. Did you know him? James stood up slowly in her hand with the kind of care people reserve for things that can't be replaced. I need to tell you something, he said. And I need you to come somewhere more private to hear it. Lena looked at the billing counter, at the clerk, who was pretending very hard to be invisible, at the lobby around them where 3 separate people were no longer doing anything except watching. My son's bill will be handled, James said. I promise you that, but this is more important. Lena Farrow had mopped the floors of St. Augustine Medical Center for 7 years. She knew every corridor, every supply closet, every shortcut from the east wing to the parking structure. She had never, in any of those 7 years, been invited into the administrative wing on the 6th floor. The difference up there was the kind of quiet that money makes. The carpet was thicker, the lighting warmer. There were plants that were clearly alive and had been alive for a long time, which in Lena's experience was the truest indicator of institutional stability. James walked quickly. She kept pace. You're going to tell me my father did something, Lena said, because silence in moments like this had always made her more nervous than words. Something I didn't know about. Yes, was it bad? James glanced at her. No. Then why do you look like someone just told you your car is on fire? Something shifted in his expression. She got the impression he was not accustomed to people asking him questions like that. "Because," he said after a moment, "your father is the reason I became a physician." Lena stopped walking. James stopped too. "Your father worked the night shift in the ER in 2003, James said. "I was 24, first year of residency. I made a mistake with a patient, a serious one, the kind that follows you. Your father was the only person on that floor who didn't treat me like I was already finished. He sat with me for 2 hours after my shift ended and he talked me through it." He paused. "He also told me that if I ever let institutional pressure turn me into someone who stopped seeing patients as people, he would personally find me and say so to my face." Lena felt something complicated move through her chest. "That sounds like him," she said quietly. "He left this hospital 8 months before I was appointed CEO, James said. I never got to tell him that I made it, that I tried to be what he said." They started walking again. Lena was quiet for the first time in the whole conversation. James's office was at the end of the corridor, large windows looking out over the city. He didn't sit behind the desk. He sat in one of the chairs near the window and gestured to the one across from it, and Lena thought that was a small thing that said a lot about a person. On the table between them, he placed a folder she hadn't seen him pick up. "When I took this position," he said, "one of the first things I did was go through the historical employment records, looking for people who had been with this institution the longest, who had shaped its culture in ways that weren't documented." He opened the folder. "Your father's file was flagged in 2019 by someone in HR as containing incomplete exit documentation. When I looked into it, I found that he'd left behind something he never filed." He placed a single sheet of paper on the table. Lena leaned forward and read it. It was a formal letter on hospital letterhead, dated 2016, signed by her father. A proposal to establish a permanent financial hardship fund for hospital employees and their immediate families, funded by a percentage of executive bonuses. The language was careful and specific. It had never been submitted. "Why didn't he submit it?" Lena asked. "I don't know for certain," James said. "But the notes attached to it suggest he was told informally that it would be rejected by the board and that pursuing it might affect his standing." He paused. "Someone discouraged him, quietly." Lena sat back. She thought of her father, who had worked nights for 20 years and come home tired and still asked about her day. Who had taught her to highlight documents because, he said, if you walk into any room without money, you walk in with organization. Who had sent her an envelope 2 months before he died that she had carried unopened for 6 years. "He gave up on it," she said. "He put it away," James said. "There's a difference." Lena looked at him. "I've been trying to figure out how to revive this proposal since I found it," James said. "But I needed the right moment and, frankly, the right reason to put it in front of the board again." He looked at her steadily. "I didn't expect the reason to walk up to the billing counter holding a highlighted folder and refuse to step aside." Lena let out a sound that was almost a laugh. It surprised her. "I was pretty close to stepping aside," she admitted. "But you didn't. My son's bill is $42,000. I know." James closed the folder. "And that is going to be resolved. But I want you to understand that what your father started is not finished. It was never finished. It was just waiting." Lena felt her eyes sting in a way she had not expected. She had not cried in 11 days. She had been too busy fighting. She pressed her fingers against her eyes for a moment, took a breath, and then looked at the envelope still in her hand. "I should open this," she said. James nodded. He didn't look away, but there was nothing invasive in it. It was the look of someone who understood that some things needed a witness. Lena opened the envelope. The letter inside was 1 page, written in her father's handwriting. The same handwriting that had signed her permission slips it and written her name on her lunch bags for the first 12 years of her life. "Lena, if you're reading this, I'm probably gone. And you're probably fine, because you have always been fine even when I worried you weren't. You got that from your mother. The stubbornness is from me. There's something I need to tell you about where you work. I left something unfinished there. I wasn't brave enough to finish it. I told myself it was strategy, that I was waiting for the right time. The truth is I was tired, and I was afraid. I hope you'll forgive me for that. The proposal is in my HR file. I never got rid of it because I always thought someone might find it someday and pick it up. You belong in that building, Lena, not just with a mop. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, not even yourself. All my love, Dad, P.S. The dinosaur in your bag has been there since 2017. I put it in when you weren't looking. I thought it might make you smile on a hard day. I hope it did. Lena looked at the small plastic dinosaur sitting on the table where she'd placed it. She pressed her hand over her mouth. Then she laughed, and it came out wet and broken and real, the kind of laugh that happens right at the edge of crying, and she didn't try to stop it. James said nothing. He just waited. After a moment, Lena set the letter down on the table between them. He put a dinosaur in my bag in 2017, she said. I heard. I have been carrying that dinosaur for 7 years, and I thought it was my son's. Your son's name is Sam? He's 17. He collects them, actually, so it wasn't a strange thing to find. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. My father was ridiculous. He sounds remarkable, James said. He was. She looked at the letter, then at James. You've been sitting on this proposal for how long? 14 months. And you were waiting for what exactly? The right person to co-present it, James said. Someone the board can't dismiss as an administrator with a pet project. Someone with standing. I'm a housekeeper. You're a 7-year employee with a documented billing dispute, a father who drafted the original proposal, and apparently the backbone to stand at that counter and refuse to move. He paused. The board meets in 3 weeks. Lena stared at him. You want me to present this to the board? I want you to stand in the room, James said. I'll do the presenting. But some arguments land differently when the person the argument is about is standing right there. Lena looked out the window at the city, at the gray November sky and the parking structure, where her car was going to need a new alternator in about 2 months if the sound it was making was what she thought it was. My son still has a $42,000 bill, she said, which we are going to address today before you leave this floor. James stood. I want to be clear that the two things are not connected. The bill is being corrected because it should be corrected. The proposal is a separate matter, and your participation in it is entirely your choice. Lena picked up the dinosaur. She turned it over in her hands. My dad would have liked you, she said. I hope so, James said. He set a high bar. 3 weeks passed, and Lena Farrow's life did not get quieter. Sam's bill was corrected within 48 hours. 2 of the 3 anesthesia charges were reversed. The financial hardship application was reopened and approved within the week. Lena drove home that evening with the radio off and cried in the driveway for 6 minutes before going inside. Sam was on the couch with his laptop, still moving carefully because his incision was still healing, and he looked up when she walked in. You look like you either won something or had a catastrophic day, he said. Bit of both, Lena said. She sat down next to him. You know, Grandpa worked at my hospital. For like 100 years, yeah. Did he ever talk to you about? She stopped. Did he ever say anything about something he left unfinished? Something he wanted to do but didn't? Sam thought about it. He was a serious thinker. Sam, the kind of kid who took questions at face value and answered them honestly, even when you half expected him not to. He said once that the hardest thing about getting old wasn't the getting old part, Sam said. It was the things you started that other people had to finish. He said he hoped he'd left enough for someone to pick up. Lena pressed her lips together. He did, she said. Cool, said Sam, and then, is there food? The days between then and the board meeting were the strangest of Lena's life. She mopped floors in the morning and read policy documents in the evening. James had sent her a copy of her father's original proposal and a summary of how he'd updated it, and Lena read it so many times she could have recited sections from memory. She ran into James 3 more times in those 3 weeks, which was not a lot, but each time there was a quality to the conversation that she didn't have a word for. He asked about Sam. She asked about the board dynamics. He showed her the administrative argument in straightforward terms, and then added, almost every time, something her father had said or written that had stayed with him. It was strange, being known through the eyes of someone who had known her father differently than she had. He told me once that his daughter had his stubbornness and her mother's precision. James said one afternoon, in the hallway outside radiology, which was not a planned meeting, just one of those collisions that happen in buildings where 2 people spend a lot of time. He said that was the most dangerous combination he'd ever encountered. He said that? He was very proud of you. Lena looked at the floor for a moment. He didn't say that a lot. Directly, no, James said. He said it to other people instead. I think he thought if he said it to you too much, you'd stop working as hard. Lena looked up. That is exactly the kind of reasoning he would use. James smiled. It was a real smile, not the CEO version, and it changed his face in a way she noticed and then promptly looked away from. The morning of the board meeting, she put on the one blazer she owned, the navy one she'd bought for her father's funeral and worn twice since, and she drove to the hospital in the November dark. The boardroom was on the 7th floor. Long table, 8 people around it, the kind of faces that had made consequential decisions for so long that they looked at everything with the same practiced neutrality. There was one woman at the far end of the table whose expression was the precise temperature of refrigerated air. Her name was Margaret Holt, and Lena had cleaned her office twice and knew she kept a photograph of a Labrador on her desk and nothing else, which told you something about a person's priorities. James stood at the head of the table and presented the proposal with the clarity of someone who had been thinking about it for 14 months. The financial model was sound. The precedent existed in other health systems. The administrative infrastructure was already there. And then he said, "I'd like you to hear from someone this policy would have directly impacted." Lena stood up. She had not planned to say anything about her father. She had planned to talk about Sam, about the billing process, about what $42,000 looks like, from the perspective of someone who earns $29,000 a year. But when she stood up in that room, with the board watching her, the way important rooms always watched people who didn't quite belong in them, she thought about the dinosaur, about an envelope carried for 6 years, about a man who mopped these floors and loved his work and raised her to hold her highlighted folder in both hands and refused to step aside. "My name is Lena Farrow," she said. "I've worked in housekeeping at St. Augustine for 7 years. My son was hospitalized here last month, and I came to the billing counter to dispute 3 duplicate charges and ask about a financial hardship application that had been incorrectly denied. I was nearly escorted out of the building before I could finish the sentence." Silence. "My father worked here for 19 years, she continued. "He was a nurse in the emergency department. He wrote the original version of the proposal you're looking at today. He didn't submit it because someone told him it would cost him his standing to try." She paused. "He's been gone for 6 years. I found out about the proposal 3 weeks ago. I found out because I wouldn't step aside." Margaret Holt, at the far end of the table, was watching her with an expression that was no longer refrigerated. "He left me a letter," Lena said. "He told me he hoped someone would pick up what he'd left. I'm picking it up. That's all." She sat down. James didn't look at her. He was looking at the board, but she could see in the line of his shoulders that something had shifted. Margaret Holt said, "I'd like to call a vote." The vote was 6-2 in favor. Lena sat very still and stared at the surface of the table. James looked at her then, and what passed between them was brief and quiet and not particularly describable, which was the way the most real things usually were. Afterward, in the hallway, away from the board and the neutrally lit room, Lena leaned against the wall and let herself exhale completely for the first time in 3 weeks. "Your father would have found about 40 things to critique about the way I structured the financial model," James said, standing across from her. "He would have been right about most of them, yes," James said, "probably." They stood there a moment. The hallway was quiet. Somewhere down the corridor, an elevator chimed. "Thank you," Lena said, "for finding the proposal. For not," she stopped, "for not letting it stay buried." "Thank you for standing at that counter," James said. "I almost walked by. I heard your voice when the elevator opened. The way you said I belong here more than anyone in this building." He paused. "You were right." Lena felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't realized was still tight. "I should get back," she said. "I have a 4 o'clock shift." "I know," James said. "I know your schedule." She looked at him. "Not in a," he stopped. Looked faintly like a man who was reassessing a sentence mid-construction. "I reviewed the staffing records when I was looking into your father's file. Your attendance record is 23% better than the department average. That's a very unusual thing to know about a person. I'm a data-driven administrator. You're a man who memorized a housekeeper's attendance record." James looked at the floor, and Lena realized with some surprise that this was what James Calloway looked like when he was embarrassed. It was a very human look. She found she liked it. "The proposal will take about 60 days to implement," he said, recovering. "I'd like your input on the rollout. If you're willing, I work 4 to midnight on Thursdays. I'm usually here until 9. That's not great overlap. I'll work with it, James said. Lena looked at him for a moment longer than was strictly necessary and then looked away. My son is going to want to know everything that happened today, she said. He's going to ask me 17 follow-up questions. He's also going to want to know if you have a dog, because that's the first thing he asks about every person I mention. I have a dog. Of course you do. She pushed off from the wall. What kind? Beagle. Her name is Margaret, actually. Lena stopped. You named your dog Margaret, after my grandmother. The board member's name is Margaret. I'm aware, James said. She's also aware it has not improved our working relationship. Lena laughed. A real one, unguarded, the kind she hadn't expected to have in this building today or possibly this month. James watched her laugh and looked like someone who had just found something he hadn't known he was looking for. Thursday, Lena said. 9 o'clock. I'll be here, James said. She walked back toward the elevator. She pressed the button for the lobby, for the locker room, for the cart and the mop and the floors she'd spent 7 years learning by heart. In her coat pocket, the plastic dinosaur clicked against her keys. She thought of her father, of a letter held 6 years, and finally read, of a proposal left unfinished and picked back up, of a man who had talked a 24-year-old resident through his worst night and never heard that the resident made it all the way. Thomas Farrow had spent his life planting things he knew he might not see grow. Lena rode the elevator down and thought that the least she could do was tend what he'd left. And somewhere on the 6th floor, behind the warm-lit window at the end of the administrative corridor, James Calloway sat back down at his desk and looked at the framed quote his assistant had put there on his first day, the one he'd never changed. It was a simple thing, just 7 words, see patients as people. T. Farrow 2003. He had never known until today what the T stood for.